Good afternoon. Well, my name is Rosa Carrillo. I'm the director of the Language Access Program for the District of Columbia, a program housed in the Office of Human Rights. And this afternoon, we are with Ben DeGuzman, director of the Asia Pacific Islander Affairs Office. Ben, I'm gonna let you introduce yourself as well, but I have a pleasure to talk to you this afternoon about language access.
Yes, thank you, Rosa. It's a pleasure to be with you today. As you said, my name is Ben DeGuzman, and I'm proud to serve Mayor Muriel Bowser as the director for the Mayor's Office on Asian and Pacific Islander Affairs here in Washington, D.C. Especially, it's great to talk to you with May being Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. It's a particularly great opportunity to be able to talk about our office and the ways in which we serve the Asian American and Pacific Islander community here in the nation's capital.
So I know that this conversation is going to be involving questions, and I'm happy that you will be helping me with those questions, and for your community and your constituencies also learn about language access. We just finished April, which is the month for language access awareness. And what better opportunity to just match with May that we celebrate in your community. And we'll be doing the same through this interview, and also extending to the other communities as well. So therefore, this meeting and this conversation is being recorded, and it will be available in the top 6 languages. And we'll talk about the top 6 languages in a second. So I'm all yours in terms of questions. Ben.
Great, thank you. Thinking about the Language Access Act of 2004, as a tool to provide the ability to have equal access for people with limited English proficiency and people who don't speak English very well, to make sure that they're able to benefit from the resources and the services that are provided by the government here in the District of Columbia. Through the law, people can access services, participate in our programs, and through the process of interpretation that our government is obligated to provide for people in their native language, and to make sure that documents that are vital for people to understand, to make sure that those are translated into the languages that our residents speak.
Thank you, Ben. And I should add this for people to also, when they hear this recording and it's being shared with our community, with the limited English proficient community. This is the Language Access Act of 2004. Absolutely right. This is what you just explained, is exactly what the act enables and covers, which is providing greater access to everybody, and especially to have equal access, as well as for the people who just speak English. So that's the spirit behind this act, that was in 2004. So it's been 18 years. It's surprisingly, yes. So I'm ready for your next question.
Yeah, sure. It's funny, Rosa, I remember it just feels like last week that we were celebrating the 15th anniversary.
That's right.
That's right. Yes, and I was reminded at that event that I was around when the Language Access Act was passed back in 2004. I was in the nonprofit sector working on language access for Asian American and Pacific Islander communities as a policy issue that we were working on. So I remember very clearly when that law was passed here in Washington, D.C., working as an advocate to make sure that that law was going to be able to make sure that language access was going to be something that that the District of Columbia had as a priority, because we know that language access is important for people who don't speak English, because it was something that we know is vital for them to make sure that they have access to all of the services that the government provides. Just as a side note, actually, in terms of the importance of language access, it's funny, I get to talk about this, especially during May and Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month, because language access as a government obligation was really put in place through a ruling from the Supreme Court back in 1974, I believe, through the Supreme Court case Lau versus Nichols, which happened when a family in San Francisco, in San Francisco's Chinese American community, realized that their family was not being serviced in the same way that people who spoke English were. And so they sued and made sure that national origin, which is a right guaranteed for us in terms of not being discriminated against because of your nation of origin, the Supreme Court ruled that language was part of that. And so that set in place the precedent that requires the government to provide access to speakers with limited English proficiency. And so that's why, that's what brings us here today.
That is right, Ben. And I think that's why also it's important to remember, to remind people the importance of this act, especially in the DC area. And for those who's been around for a while in DC, and I know some of the interpreters who are helping us this afternoon have been around and been also part of this movement back in 2000 and 2001. And this is one interpreter I know who's been very pivotal in this process. And remember having this, why it was important, right? Back in the 70s was a translation act, or translation act in the district. And then was moving to see there's need to expand this, not only to one particular community in Spanish, but to expand to cover and include everybody who lives in the District of Columbia. So the importance of having this act, it's because it's more inclusive, of course, but also how the people with limited vocabulary and who don't speak English well, the opportunity to equally participate, no, in everything that it's involved in their life. In the same manner as I mentioned before, to the people who just speak English, no, and has only access to that. So that's one of the main things that we need to keep in mind about importance for this act.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I should also say that the provisions of the Language Access Act of 2004 provide for particular levels of language access depending on the number of speakers of a particular language, right? And so so if the number of speakers of a particular language meets a minimum threshold, that triggers a requirement for the city to provide a particular level of service in that language. Right, so in terms of here in Washington, DC, there are 6 languages whose speakers are meet the number of the speakers meet that threshold, right? So the 6 languages that whose speakers meet that threshold are Spanish, Vietnamese, Korean, Amharic, Chinese, and French. So people who speak those languages as their native language with and who don't speak English well are able to have a particular level of service in terms of interpretation and with respect to documents that the city produces that are vital documents. And those documents are required to be translated into those 6 languages.
Yes, that's correct. And actually, French was the last edition in terms of the language, but the initial legislation passed 5 languages, and then we added French because there was a huge need on that language too for that community. And you said something very correct about the language attached to threshold, and in turn comes with a written translation. But also, let's keep in mind if a constituency will speak any other language besides those 6 languages that just Director DeGuzman just mentioned, it's they have also the right to request an interpreter. If somebody speak, I don't know, just Bengali, and they need oral interpretation, they are I mean, they have the right to request the oral interpretation in any language. For written translation, yes, it's definitely touched with the idea of having a language threshold. So it's important that our community is informed about this, those provisions. And thank you for sharing the number of languages, Ben. Now, people keep asking what type of agencies or organizations or groups are covered under this act? Says, can I go to a store and ask for this? What type of agencies or organizations, right, are covered under this act? It's
right.
Remind everybody about this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so in terms of city government, there are 38 government agencies that have major public contact in terms of interacting with our residents. There are 25 agencies that have less public contact in terms of talking to our residents. And all of the organizations, contractors, and people that receive some type of government funding or have a contract with the District of Columbia, those are the entities that are covered by the law in terms of the Language Access Act.
That is correct, yes. Thank you for sharing that. And also it is important to understand who can request services. Can anybody request services for under the Language Access Act? Who is covered under the Language Access Act? I can start by saying this first part, it's anybody who has limitations in speaking, writing, or understanding English, who live, works, or visit the District of Columbia, or solicits services, or just wanna get access to any program or participation in any government service or program, as well as keep in mind also funded entities, as you just mentioned earlier, any funded grantee or contractor who receive any type of funding from the District of Columbia also is required to provide that service to individuals who don't write or speak or understand English well. So anybody who works, again, live or visit the District of Columbia has a right to request these services.
Yeah, no, I think that's important to reiterate because especially because DC is such an international location and destination for people. So even if you're not a resident, even if you don't live here, we have a robust tourism industry, for example, so people who come to visit, people who work. You know, in this pandemic, we've been doing a lot of online meetings like this. So people who are doing meetings with us from other locations, they're covered as well by the Act. I would also say, just as an interesting side note, that I've spoken with people from the Canadian government, for example, and DC, because of the large immigrant population that we have from countries in Africa. As you said, French is one of the languages that's covered, but DC is actually one of the largest cities of French-speaking people where the language is not, where the official language is not French. So, so for any city in the world where French is not the national language, DC is one of the largest cities of that type that provides, you know, that has many French speakers.
Yeah, thank you for sharing this fact. I mean, and when you might remember this, when the whole movement about language access started, one of the places that we were thinking about, just the first thing that we were asked by the council member who introduced this legislation was to how many languages? And we rely on what languages are spoken in the area. We rely a lot about DCPS data in terms of the international students, but students with which were ESL students. And we learned that there were 186 languages at that time, back in 2001 and 2002. I didn't get back to see the data because, again, I think an anniversary, 10 years anniversary of Language Access Act, there was a research by Brooklyn Institute about the number of languages spoken in this small city. I mean, it's amazing to see the number of languages that are spoken in this city, and DCPS is one of the agencies that has the greatest data about capturing that. One of these is that it's changing or not. We'll see what happened with any version in the 20 year. We can do another study and research and see what's the state of that.
Yeah.
And that is important to also move into the next topic about language access. And it's when we talk about, so if I'm eligible to request services because I live, I work, or I visit the District of Columbia, am I also eligible to file a complaint if I feel that my rights were violated in terms of language? So the answer to that question is yes. You can file. Who can file a complaint? Or basically, how can a person file a complaint if they feel that the language has not been provided or violated? And this is why we have an act, a very purpose act in the District of Columbia, that the person can file a complaint. A complaint can be filed online, in person, or by mail, or by phone as well. The process to file a complaint, I want to share this with all of you, and I'm sure you also share this with the constituencies, but I just want to, because our office is the one that, Office of Human Rights, that handles all the language access complaints.
Mm-hmm.
So first, there is a review. When the complaint arrives, there is a review to determine if there is jurisdiction on language access. Exactly, if this violation of the language access happened in the District of Columbia or happening somewhere else, in Maryland, Virginia, or in another jurisdiction. So it's important to determine jurisdiction of the act. If we find that, yes, there is a jurisdiction under the act, then immediately my office get in contact with both parties, the person who's filing the complaint and the respondent, the person who's been filing against the complaint too. Whether it's a government agency or a funded entity or a vendor or contractor. But once we find immediate solution to the problem. And that is called the pre-investigation process. If there is a solution of the problem of the language access gap in that issue, then we don't move under investigation. The problem is solved in the pre-investigation, so parties have received the services and we all move into corrective actions immediately. But if there is no solution, or the agencies or the respondent decided that they're still in compliance and there's no an agreement there, then we move the complaints under the investigation. The investigation process may take around 6 to a year to determine whether the agency or the funded entity is in compliance or not. If it's found in no compliance, then my office will meet with the respondent or with that agency to set up a corrected actions, a plan that really can help us to fill up those gaps in language access. So, and the complaint can file online, and the complaint, it's translating in the top 6 languages. It's in our OHR website. We can send that information later on and share with your office so your constituents can learn also about this, the right that they have.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not that we encourage them to complain, but it's important to know if the services are being provided. So that's the only way that we can help the agencies and funded entities to better improve their services. And also for the other side is that they receive the service that they needed, that they have the right to.
Exactly. I would just also add, Rosa, that you referred to kind of the moment of language access back not just in 2004 when the act was officially passed in DC, but the movement to get it passed, right? In going back to 2000, 2001. 2000 was actually the year that the federal government, thanks to the President Clinton at the time, issued an executive order whose number I used to know. I think it was 13125.
You close to, I think it's 16.
166, yes, 13166.
That's right.
Which put into place the provisions very similar to what we have here, but at the federal level. And because DC is our nation's capital, the Department of Justice that executes that executive order at the federal level is obviously here. And just as a fun side note, a good friend of mine is an attorney at the Department of Justice, and it's her job to make sure that that executive order is is being enforced. And so working with federal agencies to make sure that documents are translated and that the government is providing the services as well.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, absolutely. I think the federal government is our best partner. Also, Department of Justice and the Office of Civil Rights has a strong department for language access. I think one of the strongest allies we have with retired Paul. I don't know if you, I'm sure you know.
Paul Ihara, yes.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Another dear friend
yes.
Who reminds me that we've been doing this work too long, Rosa.
That's right. That's right. That is correct. I remember that that office also conducts audits to the Metropolitan Police Department in the different cities. And back in 2005 or 2006, there was an audit for the District of Columbia Metropolitan Police Department, and they have a focus group where I was part of that group. But that happens everywhere in every city. And I think our police department is getting stronger in terms of compliance, and it's due to the work that we do with those federal agencies. So, yeah.
Yeah, DC, one of the things that we get to brag about here in DC is our Language Access Act because it is one of the more robust versions of its kind anywhere in the country. So it's something
absolutely
as a employee of the city government, it's something that we get to brag about.
That's right. That's right. And another question that I sometimes hear from our community is that, as you know, our community sometimes feel comfortable of bringing their own interpreters, or sometimes bringing their family members that they feel more comfortable to speak with. And that's a great area where it says, can they have their own, can they use their own interpreter? And yes, they can use their own interpreter if they are interpreters. There are people who are able, they're first of all, no minors, right? It cannot be any child, it cannot be anybody minors. And 1 hour starts in the training, compliance training here in our office, Priscilla Mendizábal, is make sure that she knows that, she makes sure that everybody knows that how to use an interpreter waiver, right? If they decided to, it's not encouraged, but we understand that sometimes our community decided to bring their own interpreter for purposes of confidentiality or privacy. So yes, under the act, yes, they can do that, except to have a waiver, interpreter waiver.
No, I think that's right. And one of the things we do talk about, Rosa, is exactly what you made note of in terms of we discourage people from bringing, in terms of bringing minors, but especially your own children. Especially because there are situations where there's delicate information, for example, between a doctor and their patient, that you don't want your children to have to be responsible for. Another kind of related provision actually is related to voting. So there are separate language access provisions in terms of voting rights law that enable you to have services provided in your own language. And you are allowed to bring your own interpreter there, but again, you can't bring your a minor or your child, and you're not allowed to bring your employer or a representative from your labor union. So that's just a particular wrinkle of voting rights law that is also related to this area. And I thought that would be important to mention as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. And talking about comfortable with situations, as you just mentioned, medical, also we hear questions about that. Are our schools, are DCPS public schools covered under the Act? Absolutely, yes. They are all covered under the Act. So parents have the right to request interpretation services in their schools or any other situation where they have interaction with the educators. So just want to make sure that everybody knows. And I guess just to wrap up a little bit our conversation, which I'm enjoying because it's good to see how we relate the work that you do with your community and out there, and the community in general, not specifically yours, and working with language access that covers everything, covers every field in the work, doesn't have limitations in terms, because we see language access, work, education, everything that we do involves language. I think it's important that we know that there are certain requirements that agency needs to be in compliance with under the Language Access Act, and one of the main ones is signage. So our community is informed of what the signage that they should look into or look for it when they go to a government agency or a funded entity. That will help us to ask for interpretation service. I'm not sure if we can display that picture of how the signage will look like, but one of the main things that we need to keep in mind, thank you, Maya, for sharing this information. It's important to, when you go to a government agency, the government agency has this interpretation service guide. We call it the poster, language poster, language identification guide poster. So you can you as a community member who speak a particular language can point and identify the language that you will prefer or you need to speak to. So therefore, a representative or from the staff will be able to connect with the language line, with the telephonic interpretation service. Also, my office encourage highly to government agencies to display the ISP cards. So the ISP cards, it's the resource or tool for the public to keep in mind that they have the right for an interpretation. It's in both, it's a card that is in both languages, and we have it in the top 6 languages, if not more languages, that has the OHR office number, where they can also file a complaint. And our information is included in those ISP cards. So give you information about your right to request interpretation services as well.
Yes, our agency, you can very clearly see our language identification guide poster stares you right in the face as you enter our office. It's right there at our staff assistant's desk. Our I Speak cards are just off to the side. I actually want to make sure that we still have plenty of them in our office, so I may come up to your office later today.
That's right. This is what we're here for.
I do remember actually when I was first beginning to familiarize myself with language access policies and laws, that the I Speak cards was such a, for someone who was a novice about the law at the time, the I Speak cards struck me as a very simple yet powerful tool for people, right? Like if you don't speak English, how do you let them know that you don't understand them? And you can just hand them that card. So yes, for someone who was just beginning to learn the laws at the time, at the beginning of my career, learning about how these cards are used by our residents was a very important tool for me in my own learning curve.
Yes, and actually my office is very aggressive in terms of aggressive in a good way to say that that we distribute these cards also with the funded entities, with organizations where we know that our constituencies go more often and rely services directly with service providers. Mm-hmm. And they have available this ISP card. So residents can, residents and particular clients of those organizations can have this resource available for them and contact with us. Mm-hmm. And in particular, just because it's important that they know the rights. So I want to make sure that they all know that.
Mm-hmm. So if you come to our office, as part of our compliance with the Language Access Act, our staff speak 3 of those languages, Chinese, Vietnamese, and Korean, in terms of official professional service. I myself, my Spanish is okay, so I can speak with our Spanish residents, maybe enough to make sure that we're able to get on a language line. And I also speak Tagalog. My parents immigrated here from the Philippines, and so while I don't know that I would provide a professional level of Tagalog interpretation, I have spoken both of those languages in terms of our work in dealing with our constituents. So those are the languages that our office speaks here in the Marion Barry building in Washington.
Thank you for sharing that information, Ben, very much. And I think it's I don't know if you have any other questions, but I don't have any more questions for now.
No, I'm good. I just thank you for this opportunity. I think it's always important to be able to talk about this legislation. It's something that seems intuitive in terms of how we want to make sure that we're helping out all of our residents. But when you get into the details, which we've been able to hear, I think it's so helpful for people to know the particulars of how we provide this service and how we make sure that our residents that don't speak English well are able to be served also.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm very happy and proud to be a DC resident and a city that provides this tool and legislation to our community.
Same here, me also. Yo también.
Okay, qué bueno. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. And thank you to our wonderful interpreters who are with us this afternoon, helping us to facilitate this communication. And we'll be, as I said, available, and we'll be providing this tool to your office and the other constituency offices as well.
Yes, thank you very much. And happy Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month.
Yes, thank you. All right.